Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. You playing small does not serve the world. There is nothing enlightened about shrinking so that others won't feel insecure around you. We are all meant to shine as children do. It's not just in some of us, it is in every one of us. And as we let our own lights shine, we unconsciously give others the permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others. Thank you for joining me and welcome back to Keenan K TV. In today's video, we will be going over the Iron Mike Tyson vs Roy Jones Jr. fight. It is a fight in which none of us ever expected something like this to go down. And seemingly in this year alone, there have been many unexpected occurrences, and this one just happens to be one of the positive ones. And so before we get into it, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to my channel with the bell notification turned on. And now with that being said, let's jump right into the video. At first glance, seeing a fighter like Mike Tyson come back to the sport is always very exciting. Not only is he one of the biggest names of the history of the heavyweight division in boxing, he is also one of the most standout figures in sports period. So having him back is not only a big boost to the sport of boxing, but just sports period. His opponent on the other hand, Roy Jones Jr., is not a fighter who has been on the same layoff as he has been. Roy has been active up until 2018, and even all these years, he has still remained in terrific shape. He has been a fighter who did not hang it up when he was on top of the world, but he decided to stick around through his less fruitful years. Nonetheless, however, fate played its course, and now Iron Mike Tyson and Roy Jones Jr. will be squaring off inside the squared circle. As we are getting closer and closer to the fight, there has been a little bit of confusion surrounding the rules that will be implemented in this bout. Not too long ago, Mike Tyson and Roy Jones Jr. were not allowed to knock one another down or out, and naturally that caused for a lot of concern regarding this entire pay-per-view. But just a couple days ago, there had been a big update on the entire sanctioning of the fight, which resulted in this change. Initially, the California State Athletic Commission was to be sanctioning this matchup, so there would be no winner in this matchup, no betting, no anything of what a traditional boxing fight would be like. And then the WBC stepped in and they are now sanctioning this contest, where they also have a prestigious title on the line, which is nothing more than a big glorified WBC belt, which they always give away whenever there is a random fight going on seemingly these days. The WBC always has a title for something. Anyway, it does turn out to be something positive though, where we now have knockouts allowed, knockdowns allowed, and now we also have judges and a clear winner at the end of this exhibition fight. So that is a big change and a big positive. And now with those rules out of the way, let's talk about how stylistically Mike Tyson and Roy Jones Jr. will be competing against one another. Now, before we even begin, I don't like to be the bearer of bad news in this one, but we also can't overlook this fact. Mike Tyson and Roy Jones Jr. are not what they used to be. These guys are about 50 years old, respectively each, and they are just a shell of their former selves. If we take a look at Mike Tyson's last fight, if we can see how much shot he was at that time, then we have to keep our expectations at a very good check, because there is no way in my mind that Tyson of right now of today is even remotely capable of beating the Mike Tyson in his last professional boxing contest. Now, regardless of that fact, we have to take a look at Roy Jones Jr., his opponent. He is also in the same boat as Mike Tyson, and that makes for a good fight. This is not a fight where we have an old washed up pro fighting a young, hungry, up and coming pro. This is not like that, because when you have an old guy versus a young guy, that is for the most of the time a bad fight. But if you have a good young hungry lion going against another young hungry lion, then that will be a good fight. An old guy versus an old guy, that will be a good fight. An amateur versus amateur, it will be a good fight. But these two fighters, Roy Jones Jr. and Mike Tyson, at the age that they are both at, they will most definitely deliver a great fight for us, the viewers, to enjoy. Now, stylistically speaking and skill-wise, both Mike Tyson and Roy Jones Jr. obviously have declined. But in my opinion, the biggest decline in both performances that we will see come fight night from their primes will be coming from Roy Jones Jr., as we have already seen just how much he has slowed down, how much he has deteriorated in terms of taking damage in. He has become a fighter who has not only lost the bounce in his step, not only lost the toughness in his chin, he has just overall become the shell of what he used to be. Mike Tyson, on the other hand, even in his last fight, he still remained to be Mike Tyson. Though he may not have been as fast and as reactive, the core of his style was still representative of the fighter that he used to be in his prime years. When you saw Mike Tyson fight Kevin McBride in 2006, you could clearly tell that there was something special once upon a time in that man. But if you were to flip the script and look at Roy Jones Jr. in his last outings, then it makes you wonder what kind of a man he used to be. There is literally no resemblance in style, speed, mobility, skill-wise of what he used to be. Obviously, he carried the same swagger and demeanor in every single fight that he got into. Demeanor didn't really follow up with physical ability in those matchups. And I want to stress this very clearly. I was following Roy Jones's career up until his last fight. And around 2016, I believe, when he fought Enzo Maccarelli, he was knocked out cold with a blow I believed wasn't that much of a devastating punch. Now, obviously, it is a devastating punch in its own right, but the way Roy Jones took it and the way he got knocked out cold flat right on his face, it made me really worried. I was thinking to myself, wow, if he is this fragile at this stage of his career, then I believe he has no other option but to either step down in competition even further or just hang up the gloves. And right now, when I'm looking at Roy Jones Jr., I see a man who is physically not able to withstand a lot of punishment. And when I look across the ring for him, I see Iron Mike Tyson in front of him. And the way he has been looking in his training, the way he's been hitting the pads, the bag, one thing is for certain: his legs are still big, his entire body is still muscular, and he still looks to be very, very strong. And as they say, power is one of the last things that will leave an athlete. And in Mike Tyson's case, he has always been known for that power. And so when we have two fighters who have lost their speed in terms of footwork and hand speed, reflexes, what are they left with? Most of the time they are left with power. And out of the two fighters, Mike Tyson is not only the bigger fighter, but he's obviously going to be the stronger fighter. And so both of them being about the same size in terms of height and reach, this will not only be a fight in which Mike Tyson doesn't need to be chasing the bigger fighter down to get him against the ropes to put in work. No, now he can just come in and have a good range down already from the opening of the bell. So the jabs will set in, the straights will set in, his body work will set in, and ultimately they will be in range to be hitting one another. And out of the two fighters, I believe as soon as Mike Tyson can get the work in and start landing on Roy Jones Jr., I think the power will start to intimidate Roy, and before we even know it, there will be a big punch that will connect on Roy, and we will be seeing an immediate standing 8 count. That is how I believe this fight will go. You may think to yourself, Keenan, aren't you being a bit too critical on behalf of Roy Jones Jr.? As much as it pains me to say this, I don't believe so. If 3-4 years ago, Roy Jones Jr. was just getting knocked out with shots that put his lights out clean, then I'm just wondering what it will be like for him to go in there and fight a revived, hungry, dedicated, strong Mike Tyson. Even in his 50s, I believe Mike Tyson can get the job done as he used to when he was younger. Because if Roy Jones is not quick on his feet, if Roy Jones is not quick with his hands, if Roy Jones cannot get out of the way, if Roy Jones is not physically powerful enough to demand respect from Mike Tyson, then what kind of a chance does he have in this matchup? In the end, only time will tell what will truly happen. But for now, this is how I see the fight going down. Leave in the comment section down below who you think will win. And as always, I have been Keenan from Keenan KTV, signing off. Later.